Welcome English 110 students. Today we're going to be talking about the process paper. You're going to be working on this process paper on your own for the next few days, and if you have any questions during your process, your pre-writing, your drafting, any process, any time during the process paper, please email me because I'll check my emails and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. Alright, so let's get started. The process paper is definitely one of the most important papers you're going to learn to write. It's also, however, one of the most popular papers that you're going to see. So there's countless models out there for you to see out on the internet, on newspapers, in magazines. Think about it. Every time you pick up a magazine, this is the #1 article you're going to read. How to lose weight in 10 days, how to get rid of a guy in 10 days, how to make money in a month, and so forth and so forth. This is a very popular paper. It's also popular with your instructors because they can assess if you know the information. If you can teach somebody how to do something, then you're showing your instructors that you understand, because that's the ultimate mastery of a skill if you're able to teach somebody else how to do it. So doing that on paper is an excellent way for them to assess if you learn the information. So the process paper is critical, and I think it's one of the funnest papers that you're going to write for me in English 110. So let's get started. It is a problem-solving paper, in that that's what you're showing, is how to solve a problem. You're giving either steps or directions for somebody to follow and solve a problem that you are the expert in. So for instance, how can students cope with the increasing cost of higher education might be an example of a process paper that you would read out on the internet. What can be done to help our economy? Describe the steps that you need to take in order to find happiness in your world. So countless examples, like I said earlier. 2 types or reasons for the process paper we're going to be exploring. However, these are not defined in black and white. You can definitely blend these 2 reasons or types. And we'll see that in a moment. The first reason is the directional. And this is basically to give a step-by-step instruction showing how you do something. This is the most common that you probably are thinking of. You're giving very specific instructions. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do this. Often you'll start with your introduction. Well, you definitely will start with an introduction, but that's what we'll talk about in a moment. You're going to pull your reader in. Once you get them in, you get to the steps and the directions. Some examples: how to lose weight with yoga, the steps to financial success, how to de-stress at work. So as I'm talking, you should be thinking about, what are you an expert in? What can you teach somebody else how to do? And choose your passion, and that's what you want to be thinking about. That's going to be your topic to write on. A second reason for writing a process analysis paper is to provide information, in that you want to explain how something happens. This is popular, for instance, with in the sciences. Why spring brings more than flowers. Tornadoes too. You can see that paper, and you would have to explain the process of the development of tornadoes. How a seemingly normal child transforms into a challenging teenager. This provides information. There's no step-by-step. There's no clear way that we see a child transform this way. So it's providing information as to what leads to this development. As I said earlier, there is not a fine line between these 2 things. So oftentimes you'll have papers that are informational, that lead to directional, and back and forth, in and out. And that's okay. What I recommend for your paper is that you start with the directional approach, because it is the more simpler approach. But you're not limited to it by any means. Consider this: how to improve your writing skills. The paper might start out with beginning with general information about reading and writing and communication. So we're talking about gathering information. So we're more in the informational mode of the how-to paper. But then we might transition into providing very specific daily steps that a person can do to improve their writing. They might look into journaling. They might start editing exercises, start to read more and read more as a writer. The little steps that you would provide the person, they're informational, but they're also directional. And this is how we see an example of the papers being blended, or the types of papers being blended. All right, for our paper, we are going to start with the general requirements, which are just like your other ones. This paper is going to be in APA format. You do not need to do any research. If you do, however, then we have to talk, because you are going to have to cite that, which I haven't taught you yet, but it's coming. But the APA format that I'm going to be looking for is your title page, the headers, the page numbering. All of that has to happen with all the papers you write here at ECPI. You're not limited to the 5 paragraphs. That's the minimum. I certainly, if you're going to require more steps than 3 or whatever it is, you're going to go well beyond the 5 paragraphs. So that's just a ballpark, just to remind you that you are in the college level, and that's the very, very minimum. But I expect you to explore your topic thoroughly. Of course, the correct grammar, spelling, and punctuation counts. All these are requirements for any paper here at ECPI, but we're going to take it just a little bit further for the process analysis. And these are the things I'm going to be looking for specifically for our process analysis. First of all, your introduction. There has to be, as I've said with all your papers, the why. The why of the paper. Why should I know this? How will I be a better person for having read these steps, for having understood this process? So you have to pull me in as the reader, right? You have to grab my attention. So, how will this make me a better person for having read your paper? I should also have an idea if your paper is directional or informational or both. Okay, that should come out pretty clearly in the introduction. So you grab my attention. Think about all the examples again. Every time you open the internet, what's the opening paragraph is going to be like, how do you save money in a tight economy? And then they start with an introduction, and then they pull you in with some steps. That's exactly what you're going to do. Consider the materials that your reader will need. Okay, always consider your audience. So what materials are going to be needed? You might have to define and explain some of them further. As always, consider your audience. I'm your audience, your peers are your audience. What do you think I know? If you're giving me directions on how to change the oil in my car, well, guess what? I know very little about cars. So I'm going to need things defined clearly, location, tell me where things are in the car, and be very specific. If your audience was a bunch of students who are in mechanics and working on cars, then you're not going to have to provide those kinds of details. So consider your audience and consider what you need to define. The steps have to be clear. You have to make a decision. Are you going to move in chronological order? First you do this, then you do this, then you do this? Or is there some other way that's better for explaining how to approach your topic? I should be able to visualize, or I should be able to actually try and do the steps if it's something that I can do, if you're teaching me something that I can actually go out and practice. Transition words are going to make things clearer for moving people through the steps. Things like, next you're going to do this. In addition to that, while this is happening. So those transition words will help the reader to visualize and move through the paper. Again, as in defining the materials, there might be some terminology that needs to be defined for your audience. Then you're going to do a little bit of troubleshooting. You have to possibly give your paper to somebody else and ask them to read it. Do they understand it, or did they miss a step? There might be some things that you never thought of, or ask somebody to actually go through your process and try it. Do you see a mistake that they made that you hadn't thought of because you've never made it? So those kinds of troubleshootings you have to take into account when you consider your process. As always, you want to vary your sentences. Please don't put me to sleep, right? So use those tiny sentences to interject something important, embed it in a series of long sentences, or vary the other direction and move from long sentences embedded in some short ones. Don't be afraid to play with how your sentences start. Strong verbs drive strong sentences. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Strong verbs are the key to improving your paper if you don't improve anything else. You're going to be using a lot of active verbs in this sentence, in this essay, because you're going to be telling people what to do. List this, save this, stir this. Yeah, so consider your verbs, vary them and make them strong and active. And lastly is your conclusion. Okay, you got me to read the paper. I'm going to be a better person. Now what? Now that I know how to do this process, now that I'm a better, wiser person, then what? This is a good time for you to summarize all the steps And then lastly, to sort of a call for action. Okay, now that you know how to change your oil, just drive right by Jiffy Lube and change your own oil and save yourself some money. Whatever it is, how am I a better person? Remind me of what you said in the introduction. Bring it all back together, and your paper is coherent, it's strong, it's put together well, and there's a reason for it. There's always has to be that reason for why I need to read this paper. Okay? And that about sums it up. That's your process paper. Enjoy.